This is Gene DeLisio with a featured sports interview from WDLB and WOSQ. Paul Sommers was a three-sport athlete at Marshfield High School, excelling in football, basketball, and baseball for the Tigers between 1960 and 1963. He was an all-conference quarterback in football, led the Tiger boys basketball team in scoring in 1963, and was a first-team All-State pitcher for the Tiger baseball team in 1963. Paul was also 13-0 for the Marshfield Legion baseball team between 1962 and 1963, and then won 3 varsity letters as a pitcher at UW La Crosse between 1965 and 1967. For his efforts, Paul was inducted into the Marshfield Tiger Athletic Hall of Fame in 2007.
Well, it means a lot to me. As a Marshfield High School graduate, I learned early on through experiences in athletics in Marshfield that if you put your mind and your trust in God, there isn't anything that you can't accomplish. And my feeling is, for me, athletics gave me that beginning in competition, both or in 3 sports, basketball, baseball, and football, and using those experiences in competitive settings. My belief is when you put your mind to getting something done and you allow God to work in your heart, there isn't anything that you can't accomplish.
You certainly accomplished a lot during your days at Marshfield High School. Before we get specifically to your career, can you go back maybe a few years before that? Were there some individuals, some athletes in Marshfield that you admired, you looked up to going into high school yourself?
Charlie Oslockson stands out. Charlie was a couple of years ahead of me, but he set the standard and he set the bar very high. And our belief was that watching him work, and he worked very hard and he achieved very much. If we did the same thing in our selected sports, we could achieve the same thing. So Charlie stands out in my mind very much as an athlete to be honored and emulated and to be followed. So I would say he would be the one that would that I'd mention.
And you were in a situation there in the early 60s where you played with Charlie briefly as a sophomore, I believe. He was a senior, but you also had some other really outstanding athletes come through at that time. Can you talk about some of those other teammates you had?
Well, we had some very good football teams, and Rick Beebe and Tom Kresge were our 2 halfbacks that we did extremely well in the Valley. They were probably some of the most talented running backs I've ever seen. We had Bob Mason as one of our ends on that particular team, and we finished as high in the conference as we had in probably the previous 10 years. Gene Dix sticks out of my mind. Gene was a track star. He could run the hurdles second to none, and he probably was a state champion in both the high and low hurdles at the same time. In my class, one of my colleagues, Rich Sommer, was a state individual wrestling champion. So there were pockets of great athletes that were there at Marshfield and that shined throughout the state.
And you had some fine accomplishments in your career. I want to talk about your football career first, and if you would talk about Coach King and what he meant to your development and what he meant to you personally.
Well, Coach King was a Little League baseball coach, and that's where I first got to know him. And he was probably my first strong and most directive leader that I became acquainted with in Pee Wee baseball. I played Pee Wee baseball throughout my career, and Coach King, when I was about 15 years old, basically enabled me to become a baseball player on the varsity team as a freshman, which was, in my mind, I didn't think much about it, but looking back at it now, that was quite a big deal because freshmen just weren't playing varsity baseball or varsity any sports. So Coach King was probably my first and foremost coach because he coached both football and baseball. And in football, I played as a quarterback and as a defensive end, quarterback on offense, and learned what it was to really focus on targets, work hard, and with his support, we did many things that were exciting and fun.
Looking at some statistics today of your quarterbacking career, the numbers are much different than we have amongst quarterbacks today. It was a much different game back then. Can you talk about some of the differences and how the quarterback position was different then than it is today?
Well, the quarterback position, in my case, was one of, we had mainly a running game. We had good backs, we had running plays. The single wing was big in the Wisconsin Valley Conference, and we were really a running team. We did some passing, but really it was set up as a running team with a set of running plays. And Coach King would give us the plays to take into the huddle. But unlike today, we did not have pre-planned plays that we could look under our armband to pick up. We did not have a lot of flash. We were more, in our case, meat and potatoes football, and lots of straight-on blocking, and we had extremely good running backs. So it was really a grind them out type of football game.
During your basketball career, you played for Chuck Turner, and what was he like to you?
Chuck Turner was a dream to play for. He was one of those coaches that you'd give your eye teeth to play for, and he was the type that if he told you to do something, you'd run through a wall to do it, because you knew that he was there to support you. He was hard on you from a discipline point of view, and you had to walk a pretty tight and narrow line. He got all over your back, but when you got in a scrape, he was at your back. He was your guard. He was your friend. He was your befriender, both on and off the field. He was a mentor and just a tremendous coach.
What was it like playing in Purdy Gym?
Well, Purdy Gym had a unique characteristic, and that is if you shot a ball from the corner of Purdy Gym, you may just hit the balcony. But Marshfield basically became a very good team, and we were a power in the conference because, quite frankly, when other teams would come to play in our gym, particularly the Purdy Gym, we knew how to get them boxed into the corners, and we knew how to take advantage of it. So that gym turned out to be a tremendous sixth player on the floor when we played basketball.
Well, we've talked about your football and basketball career, but you certainly were standout in baseball as well, a 4-year varsity player, as you mentioned. If you would, talk about some of the highlights of your baseball career.
I love baseball. Baseball was a game that my dad loved, that he brought me to love. He taught me how to pitch. He was also a pitcher. I love to play ball. I was not an overwhelming fastball pitcher. I had a good fastball, but I had a curveball that my dad taught me to throw that was basically unhittable. I probably had the lowest earned run average of any pitcher during probably a 10-year span. I went on and played baseball at the University of Wisconsin lacrosse and set earned run averages there as well. But my dad taught me how to throw strikes. I didn't walk very many people, but it was a case where every ball that I threw was either going to be hit on the ground or hit as a pop-up, and he taught me how to do that. So as long as the fielders could either catch pop-ups or ground balls, we were in great shape.
And you had a great opportunity to play baseball because of the Tiger season, then the American Legion season, so you were playing a lot of baseball back then, weren't you?
We played baseball we started training in the later winter, right after basketball season was over, played high school baseball then, and then we had a crack Legion, American Legion baseball team here, so then all summer long we would play. The teams that we had included the best players from Stratford, from Auburndale, from Neillsville, from Spencer. When we put that team together for Marshfield, we were almost unbeatable for 3 to 4 years, where we had tremendous pitching, great hitting, and basically almost great athletes at every position.
You were mentioning during your talk there about playing with Mickey Van de Hey, who is certainly one of the most recognized names amongst baseball players for their prowess. Talk about Mickey and what made him such a special player.
Mickey was probably, in my time, the most talented athlete that I knew. I remember a game where Mickey basically, it was a left-handed pitcher, and he basically threw his arm out pitching left-handed, but he came back the next week and pitched and won throwing right-handed. So he was a tremendous athlete there. In terms of a hitter, the Van de Hey family, beginning with Jim and Len and then Mickey, those three individuals could hit a baseball further than anybody I had ever seen at our level of play. Mickey could hit a ball out of the park and throw a no-hitter in the same game. Tremendous athlete, lots of courage. He went on to play pro baseball for a while, but in high school and Legion ball, he was, in my mind, unequaled as an athlete. Tremendous capability.
You were talking earlier about what you described as a real turning point in your life, which occurred on the baseball field, a very difficult situation for any young man. Can you talk about that incident and how it affected you?
Well, I mentioned a little bit earlier, my belief in God began perhaps the night that I was pitching a Legion baseball game in the playoffs, in the regional, and my dad was in the stands and collapsed of a heart attack. For whatever reason, whatever came over me was I was calm. I knew what had happened. I also knew that my dad would have wanted me to go back out there and finish that particular game. The Lord's always in our life, but it's at what I call a moment of truth time that it's really, it calls a question. Are you going to stand up and address that moment of truth? And are you going to go on and do the right thing? Or are you not? And my feeling was at that point in time, that point in my career changed my life. I did go out, pitched that game, won that game. We went on to state. We ended up getting beat out that year by the state champion Beloit. But that kicked me into a different level of thinking. Up until that point in my life, I was purely an athlete. I knew that I needed to go on to school, to get an education, to do a number of things that I believe needed to be done that were really helping people. I had a chance to play with the Minnesota Twins, but I gave that up to go to graduate school. Again, I was inspired at a higher level of saying, you know what, if I can win at baseball, if I can play under duress and still do well, I can really contribute something to society, helping others with heart disease. My dad died of a heart attack, so my goal throughout my entire career in healthcare administration has been to come up with a model that could identify cardiovascular disease at the earliest point in time, correct it so that people could live a longer life than my dad lived. So I used baseball, some difficult situations to propel my career through academics, through college baseball and academics, and then into quite a great career in healthcare administration. And it's not over yet. I mean, I'm 62 now, but I feel that there's a point that the Lord is saying to me, it's time to go on and to create something new that can help more people. And that will be the Colon Prevention Centers for Cardiovascular Disease, which began at the University of Minnesota, and we've now got a center started in it's Lafayette, Louisiana, right near New Orleans, and then the third center is going to be set up in Sarasota, Florida, and it's only the beginning. And our goal again is to help as many people with cardiovascular disease that we can.
That sounds great. You mentioned going to college, and you played college baseball at La Crosse. Tell us about that experience, and was there in your mind or anybody else's mind the idea of playing in other sports, or were you just geared for baseball once you got to college?
Actually, when I went to La Crosse, I started out, I made the basketball team, but in college, my thought was, you know what, I've not been a strong student academically, and I really need to concentrate on just one sport. So my thought was, all right, is it basketball or is it baseball? And baseball was by far my greatest capabilities were there, so I stuck to just playing baseball. Had a great career at La Crosse just playing baseball. I played in the summer in semi-pro baseball with a team that was based in Melrose, Mindoro. When I say that, you'll say, where's Melrose, Mindoro? Well, it's a very little burg near La Crosse, but what we did, or what that community did, was recruit the top athletes from around the entire area, and we were a strong force in the state of Wisconsin, in the Wisconsin Baseball Association League, and we ended up beating teams out of Milwaukee and Madison, and had just a great time there too. But baseball was really my interest and my focus.
You mentioned that you turned down a chance to sign with the Twins, and we hear a lot of people from your era and before who made that decision, which young people today would think was unfathomable because of the money situation. It wasn't quite that way back in your day, but was that a tough decision to turn down the chance to play pro baseball and go on to other things?
Yeah, I mean, at that time it was a modest bonus, and I guess if the bonuses to sign were like they were today, I probably would have given it some other thought. But at that point in life, when I graduated from La Crosse, actually one of the individuals at La Crosse was the son of the manager of the Minnesota Twins team in Wisconsin Rapids. Back then, I believe it was a AA team. They had me over there to pitch for him a number of times, and basically said they'd like me to pitch for him. But by that time in my academic career, I had focused on moving to a different level. I really said that I need to come up with a different plan, an education that took me way beyond where I was at that point. Got married to my wife of 40 years. She was a high school sweetheart, Carol Newsom. She was in the class of 64. I graduated in 63. A week after I graduated from La Crosse, got married. taught school in Wisconsin Rapids for 1 year, but my goal was I need to get into graduate school. So there was an inner force, I believe it was driven by the Lord, saying you got to get to a higher level here in order to help more people. And my goal in life is how many people can I help before the Lord takes me home.
And what is it that got you eventually into healthcare?
Well, I was actually the director of special education in Wausau, in the Wausau public school system. I had gone on and gotten a master's degree in educational psychology and then a PhD in statistics, but I applied all of that work to special populations. So working with the handicapped was my feeling at that point in time as to how could I help others. Marshfield Clinic wanted to start a program to bring medicine and education together for the handicapped, and they recruited me from Wausau to start that program at the Marshfield Clinic, which I did back then it was 1970. I did that for 5 years at Marshfield, set the program up called the Comprehensive Child Care Center, and then was recruited by Gunderson Clinic in La Crosse to come down there and do the same thing. So I went to La Crosse. I left Marshfield in actually 1980. I was at the Gunderson Clinic from 1980 to 1985. I set the Comprehensive Child Care Program up for Gunderson Clinic. They kicked me up into senior administration, and then I was recruited to go to the Ramsey Clinic in St. Paul to be their chief administrative officer in 1985, and I did that from 1985 to 95. So I was doing a whole different level of healthcare that I never even imagined to begin with. But it's my belief is that the Lord said you got to get these things done. You got to go higher. You got to learn these things, and then use those skills to help even more people.
Did you ever think, as a young man in high school, and you said you were not all that academically motivated, that you'd wind up in a career like this?
Never even gave it a thought. All I can say is from the day that my dad died and I was able to go out there and meet that challenge at that point, every challenge that was placed in front of me academically going forward, I was able to meet because of whatever I achieved while I was a Marshfield Senior High School athlete has propelled me on to a career that I could never have imagined. And it's only in the Lord's eyes that He has a vision for me that's even higher than where I am now, and I keep looking for that higher standard. But it all started here in Marshfield.
Marshfield Tiger 3 sports standout Paul Sommers inducted into the Marshfield Tiger Athletic Hall of Fame in the fall of 2007. This is Gene DeLisio reporting for WDLB and WOSQ Sports.